Hello. So in this video, we're going to be talking about Ch'ae Man-Shik's short story, My Innocent Uncle. So this is going up Sunday the 26th, I think, is the date of January 2025. Coming up this following Wednesday is Lunar New Year. Happy Lunar New Year to all who celebrate. So Ch'ae Man-Shik was a Korean author. He really came to prominence in the 20s, into the 30s, and he continued writing up until his death in 1950. And he became a very successful, famous author who, according to the editors of the Norton Anthology of World Literature, where I'm reading this story, is one of the few Korean authors to be published both in South Korean and North Korean anthologies. And with a story like My Innocent Uncle, you can really see why his work would appeal both to both the Republic of Korea and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, South and North Korea, respectively. The story is told from the perspective of a young man in colonial Korea, that is Choson, that is the Korea of the pre-World War II period when it was dominated by the Japanese. Our narrator, our protagonist, is very much pro-Japanese. He is increasingly attempting to assimilate himself into Japanese culture. So that sort of presents a lot of interesting elements. So, for one thing, he assumes that the role of the government is to make people's lives better. So there's a sort of broad ideological element here. So he's talking about. So basically, this reflection from this narrator is prompted by the existence of his uncle, who is a socialist who's been imprisoned for his socialism. And he's not a particular, I mean, there's a number of issues, and we'll talk more about the uncle. But, so he says, but now it's strictly prohibited here, meaning socialism. So it's been pretty much reined in, and there's hardly anyone left who's committed to it. And I say, well done. If it's such a great thing, then tell me, why is it prohibited here, and why do those fellows get pinched and locked up as if they're mortal enemies of the state? If it's good and beneficial, then of course the government's going to promote it. And if you do well, you get at it, you'll get an award, right? And then a little bit later he says, what's a government for anyway? Well, it tells us what's good and bad and what's right and wrong, and it directs us to do this or that, and so it tries to help each of us live comfortably according to our lot. So, I mean, that's a sort of broad ideological commitment to a significant faith in the Japanese imperial government to behave in the best interests of not just its own people, but the people of Korea, the people of its colony in Korea. But it goes even further than this, right? Because very shortly after that, he says, now here's my idea. My boss has taken a shine to me, and because Japanese boss, it's worth clarifying, and because he trusts me, it looks like in just 10 years or so, he'll stake me a considerable amount of money and set me up in a different business. Based on that, in just 30 years' time, when I've reached the big 6-0, I'll have put together 100,000 won from my business. With that much money, I'll be as rich as 1,000 sack of rice a year, man. That's rich even by Choson standards. I'll be living high on the hog, and you better believe it. And there's something else my boss said. You see, I'm going to take a young lady from the home country for my wife. The home country meaning Japan, not Korea. The home country of this narrator, the home country of the Japanese My boss said he'll take care of everything. He'll pick out a nice, well-behaved one and fix me up with her. Women from the home country sure are swell. Me, I wouldn't take a Chosun woman if you gave me one. The old-fashioned ones, even though they're well-behaved, are ignorant, and people from the home country won't keep company with them. And the modern ones are all full of themselves just because they've had some schooling, so they won't do. So old-fashioned, modern, doesn't matter. When it comes to Chosun women, forget it. A wife from the home country, that's only for starters. I'll change my name to home country style. Same with house, clothes, food. I'll give my children Japanese names and send them to a Japanese school here. Japanese schools, they're the thing. Chosun schools are dirty, just perfect for turning out rotten kids. And I'm going to kiss the Chosun language goodbye and use only the national language. Because once I've taken up home country manners, I'll be able to put together a lot of money, just like a home country man. So, this narrator, who is not particularly admirable, is worth being explicit about that, is very much a collaborator with the Japanese imperial occupation of Korea. And so in that sense, it really makes a lot of sense that both North Korea and South Korea would see Ch'ae's work as ideologically in line with their basic position, because both, the communist sort of Maoist type North and the now democratic, for a long time dictatorial South Korea, both of them were founded on opposition to Japanese imperialism. They each ideologically supported and continue to support, to the extent that it continues to be relevant, Korean independence. But you also have a, I guess, more substantial debate here. A debate that is very much relevant to the ongoing conflict between North and South Korea, which is communism versus capitalism is probably the best way of putting it. Now we could say communism versus democracy, because South Korea is now democratic. And unlike the US, where we've reinstalled someone who attempted to overthrow the government, South Korea has done quite a good job, it seems, in holding their problematic president to account. So, 2 thumbs up for not allowing the president to take over as a dictator. But we get this debate between the nephew and the uncle, and neither of them are particularly admirable characters, right? The nephew is very much someone happy to sell out Korea and Korean culture in exchange for the material benefits he thinks he will get by assimilating into Japanese culture. Now, it is worth noting that typically empires that incorporate people of different ethnicities or races do not ever see those people of those different ethnicities or races as equal members. In the modern world, in the ancient world, it was slightly different, right? Romans were Romans, whether you came from Rome or North Africa, Gaul, Greece, wherever. If you were a Roman citizen, you were a Roman citizen. But in the modern world of the British Empire, French Empire, Dutch Empire, Spanish, Portuguese, Japanese, Russian, etc., the tendency has been that full membership within the sort of sphere of the empire depends on ethnicity. A Korean would not be accepted as a proper member of Japanese society, regardless of how culturally assimilated they were, is my understanding of the Japanese Empire. Certainly that was true with the British Empire, French Empire, etc., etc. If you were African, if you were South Asian, Southeast Asian, if you were Middle Eastern, whatever it was, no matter how anglicized or francicized, that doesn't sound right, but I think that might be right, you were still foreign. You were still not a proper member of the imperial system. So we've got that character. The uncle, on the other hand, seems to be a socialist intellectual type. He's well educated, but he's also he basically has been supported by his wife, who does these sort of menial tasks and things like this in order to try and provide him a basic living, and he does not sort of recognize that he has any sort of responsibility to her in any way, and he has no intention, once he recovers from his experiences in prison, and I think it was tuberculosis that he'd had. Yeah, tuberculosis. He has no intention of doing any sort of work as such in order to try and support himself. So neither of these are admirable figures. And there is a debate between the two of them about socialism versus not even capitalism as such, but socialism versus basically Japanese imperialism, which had a capitalist component to it. And one of the things that we get is that the nephew sort of openly acknowledges his ignorance on this subject matter, and that ignorance leads him to aggression. So he says here, because he was reading through these Korean language magazines that his uncle was reading, or he was flipping through them. He doesn't really read them because it doesn't seem like he really reads. And he said he sees an article that his uncle has written, and he recognizes the words economy and society. And so he assumes that he knows what it means. But he says here, I knew what was what just from seeing that much. Economy was what my uncle had studied in college, so he knew about that. And society, well, he was involved in Scotchalism, which for some reason this narrator has given up the term socialism in favor of Scotchalism, even though early in the short story he does say socialism or Scotchalism or whatever it's called, or something to that effect. So he knew about society too. So it was obvious he was writing about how economy and Scotchalism were related and which side he was on and which was right, stuff like that. I didn't have to read the article to figure it out. I mean, this fine gentleman went to college and studied economy and wasn't interested in making money, so he got mixed up with Scotchalism, and he probably swears up and down the whole article that through that economy is wrong and Scotchalism is right. Anyway, I was impressed to see he'd actually written something, so I figured I'd give it a try. But when I glanced through it, no way did I have the brains for it. I could have gotten a rough idea if the words weren't so hard, but when I pieced together what I could, not for the life of me could I figure out what he was trying to say. I was kind of irritated, so I said to myself, the hell with this, and instead I decided to corner him and give him a hard time, and I spread out the article in front of him. And so basically, the nephew confronts the uncle about the nature of socialism, and it's an interesting debate. And again, this is where it gets kind of cool, because on the one hand, you have the nephew, the speaker of this short story, who clearly has no clue what socialism is actually about, what the tenets of socialism are, etc., etc. His view of it has been entirely shaped by the views of his anti-communist Japanese boss. And so he doesn't understand anything that he's talking about, but he thinks that he does. So he comes across as rather a buffoon. And so in that sense, the capitalist position is made to look ridiculous, right? So North Korea obviously is going to be in favor of that. They can read this short story as saying, see, Ch'ae believes in socialism, but otherwise he wouldn't have written this buffoonish capitalist apologist. On the other hand, the uncle, who is apparently educated, who has written and published articles about socialism and society, really makes no attempt to clarify or explain anything. He basically just comes down to, your views are dumb, you're dumb, you don't understand what you're talking about. And that's about it. And so, I mean, in the very stridently anti-communist South Korea, particularly since the 1950s, you can see how people might read this and say, yeah, there's no justification for socialism given here. This ideologically aligns with our values, with our anti-communist values, because the socialist character is unable to defend his position. So it's an interesting short story in that sense, because it does sort of it walks that sort of interesting line of both these very, very opposed Korean governments, cultures, etc., can each find in it an ideological justification for printing the story in their anthologies and seeing it as a great piece of Korean literature aligned with their tradition.